So I had a great question from a guy called Rob Lynch last week. He said, "Hey Steve, how about a 3 notes per string lesson on moving up the fretboard using just 2 strings?" Okay, so by the end of this video, I'm going to teach you how to be able to play up and down the neck on pairs of strings using the 3 notes per string scale shapes. Any pair of strings, any key. Okay, so that's one goal. But the other thing you'll find if you stick around to the end of this video is that this expands the whole neck as well. You start being able to see the intervals, you start being able to see note functions in all of the positions going up and down the neck. So this is going to be a goodie. It's well worth watching this one to the end. Okay, so let's start from the very beginning then. So when I remember the major scale, when I remember the notes in the major scale, I know it's built from 2 tetrachords. It's a weird word, but it's a really straightforward thing. All a tetrachord is just a 4-note scale, effectively. And for the major scale, the 4-note scale looks like this. Yeah, that's the tetrachord, and you can see it's a whole step between the first 2 notes, whole step between the second 2 notes, and half step between the third and fourth. And you take that whole idea and you repeat it again 1 whole step above the last note. And that gives you your full major scale, yeah? And then you can just expand that idea up and down to the other notes in the octaves above and below. So that gives me all the notes on the 6th string. Okay, now I can take those notes and I can put them on the 5th string as well. You know, I'll look for the equivalent notes and just map them out. So I've got the 5th string and the 6th string mapped out on the guitar. Now it's worth focusing just on 2 strings to start with, because the tuning in the guitar is mostly consistent. You'll find that whatever happens on the E and the A as it's tuned by a perfect 4th, you can use on the A to the D string because that's a perfect 4th, and the D to G because that's a perfect 4th, and the B to E as well. So 4 out of the 5 string pairs you can use all the same patterns on. The one exception is G to B because it's tuned to a major 3rd. You know, you tune on the 4th fret rather than the 5th fret. Yeah. And that is irritating because it throws everything out a little bit. So we'll cover G to B in a little while, but right now I'm just going to focus on E and A because, you know, we can use that across the other strings as well. So if we look at those 2 strings, the whole neck, what I could do is I could just split them up into 3 notes per string groups, yeah? And when I do that, you can see the shapes in the video as well. You can see what that looks like. So that gives me 7 shapes moving through the octave. Now I could do that, but to me that's a bit too complicated. So let's scratch that. Instead, what I want you to do is to look at 2 shapes, or keep in your head just 2 shapes. The first one is the first one that we had in our scale. So that's this one. So keep that in mind, and then the second shape is a really straightforward one. It's a little 2-note diagonal pattern. It's that. Okay, so now let's bring ourselves back to the E and the A strings and look at those 2 patterns, map those 2 patterns on the neck. Can you see how the scale starts with that first 6-note pattern, then straight above it is that 2-note pattern, and then above that is the 6-note pattern again. And then we've reached the end of the octave, so we start again with that 6-note pattern, and then we've got the 2 notes, and then we'd start the 6-note pattern again if I had enough frets. So you can see that the octave is actually just these 2 patterns. It's 2 of those 6-note patterns and 1 of those diagonal patterns. And that's all you need to remember. Now, the next question is, okay, so where am I? I've got 2 of those 6-note patterns, so which one's which? So you can tell them apart by knowing where your root note is. Okay, so if you look at that first pattern, you can see my root note, I'm playing in G major, is where my index finger falls on the lowest string. So that's the root note. So that tells me above this pattern is that diagonal pattern, and below it, if I had enough frets, would be the second 6-note pattern, yeah? And look at the second one, you can see the root note is on the 5th string, on the higher string of the two. And that tells me above this one is the next 6-note pattern, and below it is that 2-note pattern. So that tells me all I need to know. And you can do exactly the same thing with minor keys as well. So if you look at the E minor, so E minor is the relative minor of G major, and I'll put the E minor root notes on, and when I do that you can see with this first pattern the E root falls on my little finger, or the highest note of that group of 6, or the other place you'll find it is in the middle of the lowest note. It's going to be in one of those two places, and when you know which one it is, you know where you are in that whole scale line. So let's do a quick exercise to see if we can figure this out and figure out the 3 notes per string scales from there. So what I want you to do is to start building that mental image, that image of those 6-note patterns, that first 6-note pattern, that little diagonal 2-note fragment, and then the next 6-note pattern, and then the 6-note pattern above that joins straight onto. Okay, so keep that in your mind. And now what I want you to do is just start with that low G, so we're going to work in G major just like we've done before, and just see if we can construct the 3 notes per string patterns from that mental image that you've got. So that first pattern is just that straight 6-note pattern that we already know, yeah? So the next one starts on the 2nd note, so it takes two notes from each string of that first pattern, and then it has that little diagonal, so you can construct that. Okay, next one along, 1 note from that 6-note pattern on each string, then that diagonal, and then you start the next 6-note pattern. Yeah? So you can construct that. Next one starts with the diagonal, and then moves into 2 notes from the 6-note pattern above, yeah? Yeah. Next one is all of the 6-note pattern above. Next one, okay, this is where the 2 6-note patterns join together. Yeah, and then 1 from the previous one, 2 from the next one. And then finally all of the 6-note pattern again. Okay, so we've just constructed all of the 2-note groupings, 2-note, 3 notes per string groupings up the E and the A string. And of course, like I say, because the A and the D are tuned in the same interval, they're tuned to perfect fourths, we can do exactly the same thing here. This time would be in C major, because that note is a C, yeah? Okay. So just using the same principles, and again between the D and the G strings tuned to perfect fourths, that root note would be an F, so now we're playing in F major. Okay, and like I say, between the B and the E strings tuned in a perfect fourth, so we can use exactly the same set of patterns. And as that low note is a D, we'll be in D major. And it's as easy as that. Okay, so what about the G to B then? Well, the G to B is tuned to a major 3rd, so the 4th fret rather than the 5th fret. And so because of that, everything shears, one set of strings slips by 1 fret with relation to the other. So if I draw this out on the screen, you can see what's going on there. And the 2 shapes change as well as a consequence. So the first shape becomes like a zigzag shape. And the second shape, you can still think of as a 2-note diagonal, but it's got an extra fret between. And then above that is the next zigzag. So The rules are a little bit different, the shapes are a little bit more complicated because of this one fret difference, this one semitone difference in the tuning, but otherwise the rules still are the rules that we've learnt before. So let's do another exercise around the G and the B and see if we can find our way around the neck using those. Okay, so let's explore the pattern on the G and the B strings. So just like before, we create that mental image. So the first pattern is that first zigzag, and above that is that diagonal but with a fret between, or you can think of that box. And then above that is the second diagonal, second zigzag pattern rather. And then above that, we're an octave up, so we have another zigzag pattern there. So two zigzag patterns next to each other. So once you've got that in your head, just see if you can play the 3 notes per string, 2 string groupings from there. So the first one's obvious, it's just that first pattern. Second pattern, we're moving into that little diagonal, so yeah. Third one, that diagonal's in the middle of the shape. Fourth one starts with that diagonal and then moves into the zigzag, yeah. Fifth one is just fully that zigzag pattern. Sixth one is that first zigzag pattern moving into the second one. Next one is last part of the first zigzag pattern, 2 notes from the second one. And then finally, we're an octave up again. Okay, so far we've just been looking at string pairs in isolation. We haven't been trying to join up the dots, as it were. So the easiest way to do that is actually to look at a full position and see if you can construct all of the string pairs going up, starting from that root position. So let's give that a go. Okay, so let's start with a full 3 notes per string position. So as I've been doing the root position, G major, I'll use that. But you can use any position, and actually for the exercise you should go through each of the 7 positions and see if you can do this very exercise. But anyway, I'm starting here. All we're going to do is see if we can latch onto the 2 string groupings and then work our way up the neck from them. So between the E and the A string is what we've just been doing. It's exactly the exercise that we did previously, so don't need to dwell on this. We already know this one, so I can do that. What about between the A and the D string? Well, when we look at that shape, we can see there's the zigzag pattern, which means straight above it is the second 6-note pattern, and then we have the start of the next 6-note pattern there as well. So you can do that easily. What about the next pair of strings then? So we've got that pattern. When does that happen? Well, I know that happens where you get 2 semitones together, where you've got the one 6-note pattern there and the next 6-note pattern there. So I know where I am. Easy. What about the next string? So we're going between the G and the B, so we're using the other set, the zigzag and the extended patterns. So let's have a look at this. When do I see that shape? Well, that's that stretched out zigzag pattern. You can see there's the box, yeah? And that only occurs in one position, so I know where I am, yeah? And then finally, between the B and the E string, we've got, well, there's my semitones again. So I know where I am. I know there's a 6-note pattern there and the 6-note pattern there, so I can just do this. And I could do this exercise with any of the 3 notes per string scale shapes going up and down the neck. Okay, so hopefully you can see things are really starting to open up now. Now there's one other thing that's really useful about this, and that's if you remember when I map out each one of these positions, you know that in that first position the root note is always the note that you start on. It's always the lowest note, yeah? And so we can use the fact that we know where the root notes are is to imply that we know where all of the other degrees of the major scale are as well. And then we can take advantage of that to be able to map out and understand where all of the note functions are, where all of the intervals are on the neck as well, by taking these learnings. Let me show you what I mean. So as I say, the root is always in the same position. So if you look at that first pattern, that's the root, which that must be the second, that must be the third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Has to be, if that's the root, yeah? Because those are consecutive notes in the scale. So if that's 1, 2, 3, then the diagonal must be a 4, and that must be a 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah? So that diagonal is always the 4th degree and the 7th degree. And then the second pattern, we know that my index finger just there is a root. So that's 1, 2, 3, and below must be 5, 6, 7, root. So suddenly the neck, we can start to see all of the intervals going over the neck. So if we take our full position across the neck, we know that's 1, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We just know that. What about here? Well, I know that diagonal is 4 and 7 because I know that. That's the root, 1, 2, that's 5, 6. Yeah, so I know this just by knowing those shapes. And this one, well, we know this is where the 2 shapes join together. So that must be the root, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. Yeah, it just tells me. Next position, well, I know that that's that stretched diagonal, so I know that must be 4, that must be 7, root, 5. Yeah, so I know this. Next one. Well, there, as I know before, that's one position, that's another position, that must be the root, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 6. Yeah, I know this just by knowing those shapes. So suddenly, by understanding these 2 simple shapes, I can identify all the intervals, or more properly, all the note functions of every degree of the major scale and the minor scale just by knowing these shapes. Now, my deep dive series talks about how to create 3 notes per string positions going up, each position going up the neck. So if you've not seen that, it's well worth watching that, because that really sort of causes the neck to explode and show you all of the possibilities available. So check that video out, it's really worth it if you've not seen those. Otherwise, I think we're done this week. Hopefully that's answered your question, and we'll chat next time. Goodbye.